Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Walsh. I'm the Membership Services for the Indiana Motor Truck Association. I welcome you all with us here this morning, and I want to thank ACT Research and their team for being with us as well to provide information on natural gas, electric, and the future of trucking regulations in general. A reminder that you have the ability through the chat portal on the bottom right of your screen to submit questions. You can do that so directly to me, and those questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. I would like to introduce our three speakers. Today from ACT Research, we have Steve Tam, Vice President of ACT Research, speaking to the natural gas technology. Hi, Steve. Thank you. We have Jim Meal, Principal Industrial Analyst, and we'll be speaking to the EV portion of the presentation. And Frank Malley, Director, CV, Transportation and Analysis and Research, talking about emissions. Gentlemen, I'm going to share the presentation. And the web.
Well, Kelly, thank you, and thanks also to the IMTA for inviting ACT Research to present to the group this morning. I would send you all my greetings from Columbus, Indiana. I'm the only of the three presenters who's physically located here. I'll let the others tell you about themselves maybe a little bit when they get to their part of the presentation. Kelly, if you want to go ahead and run to the next slide. Let me give you a little bit of background for those who might not be familiar with ACT Research. The company was started back in the mid-1980s. I've been here for about 20 years. I started in March of 2000. On a monthly basis or quarterly basis, we publish quite a number of reports. You can see there, I think we say 18 reports. And also do quite a few speaking engagements on an annual basis. With everything from associations to individual companies, whoever's willing to listen to us, we're willing to talk. And then we also like to bring our customers to Columbus, Indiana twice a year to just have a look at the industry and talk about what's likely to happen. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that footer at the bottom. We, ACT Research, and specifically Sam Kahan, our chief economist, won the 2019 Lawrence Klein Blue Chip Forecast Award. So we consider that quite a feather in our cap, and like to let folks know that we do, in fact, know what we're talking about. So I'm going to be speaking about natural gas today. So Kelly, if you want to jump to the next slide. You know, as you probably can imagine, natural gas has, I guess, application throughout a spectrum of vehicles, all the way from passenger car up to, I've got a cruise ship on there, but freighters are also commonly making use of natural gas. We focus specifically on the commercial vehicle portion of it. Typically about classes 4 through 8 is where we look at. So that box truck there on the left all the way through the tractor trailer combination in the center. You know, best guess, and nobody has real good numbers, but there are probably 65 or 70,000 natural gas powered commercial vehicles in that class 8 realm in operation today here in the United States. We've got about 1,500 or so filling stations, CNG filling stations, and a little more than half of those are actually public and accessible by heavy trucks. Some of the private stations sell through the fence, but there's a sufficient network out there for refueling is kind of the takeaway. I'm going to go through some of the factors that folks consider when they're thinking about adopting natural gas powered vehicles. So on the next slide, we kind of outline what those principles are. Obviously, cost is an important consideration. In fact, oftentimes the decision comes down to cost, but it can also be influenced by how much a truck needs to drive or how far a truck needs to drive. And in that perspective, refueling becomes a consideration. There are fleets that are concerned about weight. Some are not. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And you know, folks also are concerned about, well, can natural gas do the job? And the punchline is, yep, it sure can. But I would say two things. One, anybody who's making this consideration needs to do a pretty detailed study and get their questions answered by the folks that they'll partner with, because despite the sign in the window, one size does not fit all. Each one of these deals is a fleet-specific deal and needs to be treated that way. So let's take a look at some of these factors. Actually, before we do that, the next slide I want to show you just kind of what got folks interested and excited in natural gas. Back in the 2008-2009 timeframe, that was the advent of horizontal fracking, which led to the discovery of a significant increase in the number of proven reserves of natural gas in places like the Marcellus shale fields or in the Bakken oil fields. Really, any of the energy producing areas benefited from that. As a result of a lot of inexpensive fuel, and then you see the run up in diesel fuel prices, natural gas became very attractive, very appealing, and that's where we really started to see a takeoff in the adoption of natural gas. Fast forward a few years and you see what happens. Natural gas prices remained pretty stable and diesel prices fell precipitously, and that undercut a lot of the potential economic benefit of being able to use natural gas to save money. So let's talk about cost, and that'll be on the next slide. There are a number of elements that factor into that, the first of which would be, what's the differential for a natural gas powered vehicle? And I don't want to talk too specific on numbers. Generally, the premium that you're going to see over diesel for a Class 8 vehicle is going to be somewhere kind of 40 or 50%. And most of that is actually in the tanks, the natural gas storage tanks themselves, regardless of whether it's CNG or LNG. Unfortunately, the industry has not been able to achieve a significant amount of scale that would allow them to bring down those tank costs in a more in a sharper fashion, and that's kind of one of the catch-22 in the industry. I talked about the fuel cost piece price, but I would tell you again, if you're considering natural gas, you want to talk with your fuel suppliers, because if you're willing to sign a long-term contract, there are some very attractive deals out there that not only get you much cheaper fuel prices than what I showed on the previous slide, but we've seen deals where working with a consortium of participants, they'll guarantee you a flat price on the vehicle relative to the cost of diesel over the life of the ownership of the vehicle, over the life of the vehicle. So they make it a very attractive opportunity. Maintenance costs, generally lower on the natural gas side, but you do have to take into consideration possibly the specialization of facilities. It requires special handling. Another thing that keeps the price down is incentives and grants and subsidies, and organizations like MTA or NGVA can point you to folks that can help with that and exploring those options. One of the things that a lot of people are starting to consider now is just what societal costs are. And we've actually got a calculator. I'll talk about that in just a second. But what's the penalty for producing carbon? Today, nobody's actually causing you to write a check or pay that penalty. That might not be true tomorrow. And so reduced emissions is a way to potentially evolve that. And then the last consideration tied to the almighty dollar sign is residual value. What's this thing going to be worth when I'm done using it? And there's not a huge secondary market, but generally we would say that it underperforms, unfortunately, on the diesel side. One trick that folks use is actually to take their tanks off their outgoing vehicle and transfer those to the new vehicle, which represents a considerable cost savings. So that's one way to maximize residual value. Let me tell you for just a second about a fuel calculator. Actually, it's a TCO calculator now that we have. And it's not that one on the right there, although there's the URL that you can use to get to ours. But what we've done is put together a framework that asks all the pertinent questions about the dollar-related items in this purchase to help potential users figure out what the total cost of ownership for their vehicle is going to be. So you can see there we look at a bunch of different applications, a bunch of different cost elements, and it's not just natural gas. We're also looking at diesel, and it includes electric as well as hydrogen. So if you haven't used that, this is a great tool to kind of get you grounded in some of your analytical work on price. Let's transition now and talk a little bit about the range component of the considerations. Unfortunately, the farther you want to go in one of these trucks, the more tanks you need. And we'll talk about weight, but that adds weight and that also adds cost. So range is very important. Don't spec a truck to go 500 miles if you're only driving 200 miles at a time or between filling stations or stops or whatever. You need to be very specific, very intentional about how that truck is spec'd. It'll save a lot of money in the long run. One of the comments that we hear from folks is, I'm not a regular route carrier. I go everywhere, I go anywhere. And so that is a consideration. You need to look at where the fueling points are ahead of time to make sure, is this a transaction that really makes sense for me, or is this something that maybe I want to forego or think about? And as the bullet point at the bottom points out there, operations that are hub and spoke in nature or dedicated routes are really kind of more well suited to adoption of natural gas that we see today, and that's the fleets that are buying today. On the next piece, we talk about weight, so we can take a look at that slide. Yeah, go ahead back to weight, Kelly. That's fine. There we go. Again, as I mentioned on the outset, not all fleets are concerned about weight. Frito-Lay, if you're hauling a semi-trailer full of potato chips, probably not a too big deal. On the other hand, if you're Anheuser-Busch and you're hauling a bunch of beer, you are very weight sensitive. And unfortunately, natural gas, as well as any of the other alternative fuels, are going to add to the weight of the truck. The government recognizes that, and there are some places, at least on a state-by-state basis, where there are some exemptions for natural gas systems. As well, you're taking off some weight, so there's kind of a trade-off when you're getting rid of some of the emissions equipment on the diesel-powered engines. So it's just one of the considerations. If you're a weight-sensitive application or concern, to keep in mind. The last piece that I'll talk about specifically is on the performance side, and I wish that this truck that's on the next slide actually was natural gas powered, but it's not. Kelly, if you want to show them that picture so they can go ooh and ah. That truck generates almost 4,000 horsepower, but the twin 15-liter engines that are on there are diesel powered. So I've called out the specs that you can typically expect to receive from a natural gas powered truck. You do see lower fuel economy, but in general, that's going to be offset by the lower fuel price. Roughly today, about 400 horsepower, about torque, about 1,450 pounds. So in general, these trucks are able to do the work. That hasn't always been the case, and my next series of slides will talk about that a little bit, if you want to go ahead and advance. Back in early days, in 2012, the first engine that we had available to the industry was a 9-liter engine. So first of all, you're automatically thinking of 66,000-pound truck, not 80,000-pound loads. And still, it was a little bit of a stretch for the capabilities. But nonetheless, it proved as a very solid learning ground for the industry and for the natural gas manufacturers. And you see that at that point in time, there was only one engine that was available, one manufacturer that was available. If we fast forward a little bit, a couple of years to the 2014 timeframe in that next slide, and I don't know if Kelly's still there. Her screen went, there she is. In 2014, we had some more variety. We had a 12-liter engine, and we even had some bigger engines, a 14 and a 15-liter engine. At least in concept, they were being developed. But again, note that we've only got one manufacturer, and I think there's that's a salient point when we get a little bit further on down in the presentation. If we look at where we are today, those 14 and 15-liter engines, the plans for those got shelved. You can go ahead and turn one more slide, Kelly. And so we're living in a world with two options. We've just got the 9 and the 12-liter, and both of those, again, Cummins engines. So that's kind of the lay of the land. Let's take a look, a couple more slides. What happened in the industry? Why didn't natural gas take off in greater fashion than it did, and kind of what the future looks like. So the first thing is, and again we already talked about this, diesel fuel prices really dropped, and that took away the cost savings that would normally have been used to pay back the higher cost, and then put money in the trucker's pocket. And ultimately leads to a payback. I say unacceptable. The reality is it was just a longer payback, or in some cases maybe you didn't get there than the truckers were willing to accept. Infrastructure, because of the slower adoption, we started to see contraction in the money that was going into that. So rather than seeing a continued build out of stations, that's plateaued and has actually, we've started to see stations shutter their doors. Competitive pressures. This is the one that I was talking about when I was talking about one engine manufacturer. When natural gas was all the rage, each of the major engine manufacturers in the commercial vehicle market had natural gas engines in development. And they, because of what transpired, they basically shelved those plans, and they really weren't too interested in promoting their competitors' power source. It was a pull marketing situation almost entirely. So Cummins has got to go out there and do the sell, as opposed to the engine manufacturers or the truck manufacturers doing it for them. And as you can well imagine, if you're relying on your competitor to do your marketing for you, it's probably not going to work out the way you planned. And then, and Jim will talk about this here in just a minute, electrification really has garnered the spotlight, the investment dollars, and the attention. To a lesser degree, politics has been an issue, and really it's more about policy than anything else. And I talked about incentives and grants. Those are out there today, but they're less than they were, let's say 5 years ago. This actually, interestingly, is a kind of a double-edged sword. It also factors into the future of what's happening in natural gas. So let's take a look at the next slide, and I'll talk about that. First, you see, the point that I want to make, and I think the point that the industry makes with respect to natural gas, it's a ready solution. It's available today. You can go out and get this truck and put it in service and start saving both money as well as reducing emissions. You don't have to wait for a Tesla or a Nikola or one of the other electric truck manufacturers to actually make a product available. So if you're interested, particularly on the environmental front, that's a contribution that you can make today. Tax credits, that's kind of one of those political hot potatoes. And I don't know, Frank might talk a little bit more about this, but this is actually on the fuel itself is what I'm referring to here. The problem with this guy is that oftentimes we don't know whether it's going to be approved for the coming year, and it gets approved retroactively. So it's a hindrance to decision making. The good news is it's in place now, although it is going to be expiring at the end of the year. So we'll probably do that dance again. Cummins has got a near zero natural gas engine, and actually, if you use RNG, renewable natural gas, you end up with a net zero emissions on the whole, not at the tailpipe, but on the whole. This is an important distinction. So, right now, we continue to see fleet adoption. We're selling, roughly 5,000 or so natural gas engines into the commercial vehicle space on a yearly basis. But most of that is either replacement of older units or continued conversion by fleets who have already kind of dipped their toe in the natural gas pool, like it, and are staying there. So, and as this webinar is doing to some degree, but as many of the associations do, the promoting of renewable natural gas is a pretty big thing. If you can take horse manure, or I guess at the dairy it'd be cow manure, not horse manure, and recycle that into fuel, you're taking emissions out of the environment. So there's your net negative. And then as far as politics, again, I don't want to get into that too much, but if we look at President-elect Biden's energy plan, and despite the fact that we heard the existing president say, this is the end of refining and energy as we know it, fossil fuel as we know it. The reality was that was a 40 or 50-year plan, not something that's going to happen today. So I think the incoming administration is favorable to alternatives. There are going to be incentives and money and facilitation of regulation that's going to transition us to higher adoption of natural gas and electric and perhaps hydrogen, which is not to say diesel is going away. We'll have diesel around for quite some time. But I think we'll make progress on the alternative front. I've just got 2 more slides, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Jim. The next slide just takes a quick look at RNG, and you see that net negative emissions for the renewable natural gas. That's the only point that I wanted to make. And there's nothing else, be it diesel, hydrogen, electric, that can compete with that net negative. So it's really an interesting proposition. Perhaps when we're generating all of our electricity with either solar or renewable fossil fuels, electric might be able to compete, but not today. So, and then lastly, just making the point on my final slide that this is, in case you can't tell, a subject that's pretty near and dear to our heart, and we certainly keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening here. And so that's one of the publications that we offer that does that. So that's it for me. Let me turn it over to my colleague, Jim Meal, and Jim is going to talk about vehicle electrification in the CV space. So Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everybody. As Steve said, we are going to go into the next chapter with regard to alternative fuels and alternative power and talk about a subject that gets a lot of headlines in the industry these days, which is vehicle electrification. And first, I'd like to describe a little bit about the work that we're engaged in right now. We're rolling up our sleeves. ACT Research has a proud and long tradition, stretching back 10 years in alternative fuels. Steve outlined the work that we're doing in natural gas, and presently we are undertaking a deep dive study in electrification research that has us all very excited, very busy, and very productive. We're going to be taking a look at the potential for the electrification market over both the short and the long term. Our wheelhouse is the commercial vehicle market, so we're going to be looking at class 4 through 8 motor vehicles in the U.S. and Canada. This is a renewal of work that we did in 2018, and I'll be talking a little bit about that 2018 work, which is our starting point and sort of a guidepost for the work that we're doing with our customers across the board in the OE community, in the fleet operation community, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, financial agents. So it's got us pretty excited. What I'm going to do for the next few minutes is review the developments of the last 2 years. And I'm going to share the projections that we developed that still hold up pretty well for the next 15 years for electrical vehicles. And the real focus here, while we call it an overview of the electrical vehicle space, it really, in many senses, is a picture of what's going on in battery. Obviously, a lot of the excitement being generated right now is with regard to fuel cell potential, fuel cell possibilities. So I'll be talking a little bit about that over the course of our conversation in the next few minutes. But sort of taking the big macro step back, what the heck is going on here and why electric? We think it's the confluence of 3 important trends that have come together and really put the potential electrification of vehicles on the table right now. Number 1 is technological advance. Battery technology, fuel cell technology has come a long way over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. And it's really made a more powerful case for electrification across the board in motor vehicles, from passenger cars all the way to certain Class 8 applications. So that's one very critical aspect. If you don't have feasibility, you really don't have a starting point. Number 2, the social and regulatory pressures that are coming about because of concerns over climate change translating into real developments, important developments in the public policy and regulatory field. We see that in moves that the Environmental Protection Agency is taking on a national level, and individual state authorities, such as the California Air Resources Board in significant parts of the U.S. And finally, customer demand. All businesses have to listen to the voice of the customer, and with more sensitivity to sustainability goals, environmental goals that come from customers, especially those with a significant public face. These are the three elements that are coming together that are really pushing the agenda for electric vehicles. Kelly, let's go on to the next slide. So we'll show up our numbers up front. And here, our, let's say, great claim to fame over the course of 30 years is trying to get a good idea of what the direction of the total vehicles, commercial vehicle potential is. So you can take a look at the top line here, and this represents our intermediate to long range view on the potential growth of the total commercial vehicle market in the US and Canada. So again, for the mathematicians among you, you can see that over the course of time, we're starting with a market that's about 600,000 units in size, and that advances because of the fact that it's a mature market at a pace of about 1%, 1 to 1.5% compounded annual growth over the course of a foreseeable future, stretching out for 15 years. The next box down shows what we anticipate the shares being. And if you read the press, you'd almost think, oh, electrification, that's going to capture the entire market over the course of 5 to 10 years. Well, realistically, we think the potential is there, but it's going to be a gradual adoption, starting with shares, particularly in the medium duty range, that will get to about double-digit levels in a mid-decade time frame. From that perspective, from that point, by the time you move to the end of the decade and into the early years of the decade following, in the medium duty space, we think the market could advance to something on the order of 20 to 25%. So, not owning the whole space, diesel will continue to be a powerful player, an incumbent that will be difficult to dislodge. But the fact of the matter is 20 to 25%, especially in the medium duty space, is not a small amount of market to capture. Class 8, we see lagging a little bit when it comes to share, and we'll be talking about the reasons for that in the next few minutes. Now, the next box down from there translates those shares into units. And again, the big picture in terms of total vehicle sales in the US and Canada will emerge from class 6 and 7. 5 years out, we see a market of around 22,000. 10 years out, getting close to 40,000. And by the time that you advance to 2035, something on the order of 45,000. Once again, not a dominant share, but certainly one that will capture the attention of both vehicle operators and the manufacturing community, dealers, et cetera, et cetera. Following close on to that, you can see the numbers on this page for the lower end of the medium duty segment, again, with steady advancing over the course of the next 15 years. And then class 8, the units represented there. And one of the things that I do want to emphasize, we'll be talking about in a little bit more detail, is the fact that much of the share gain, much of the units to be captured will not be in mainstream over-the-road applications, but instead will be manifest in specialty applications, such as yard spotters, terminal tractors, and urban bus. However, once we get to that bottom box, this is not something to dismiss, because over 15 years, we see that the total unit take, if these numbers hold up, will get us to triple-digit volume numbers, capturing roughly 16% of the marketplace in commercial vehicles. So triple digits, 16% share, it's going to be a meaningful part of the commercial vehicle future on a national and North American basis. So Kelly, let's advance to the next slide, please. So in terms of summarizing what we found in 2018 and what we believe still holds, the largest share and the largest unit potential in battery electric vehicles is going to be in class 6-7. And here, the applications are conducive to battery electrification. While we think the biggest upside is going to be in school buses, we think most segments hold promise in that upper end medium duty range. Also, sizable share and unit potential will be captured in class 4 and 5. However, where there's going to be some drag is considerations and limitations of battery in terms of overall cost, in terms of weight displacing payload potential, and in terms of time to charge, all represent constraints on class 8. So that's one of the reasons that we think that there's a ceiling, a limitation on the class 8 marketplace. Okay, I guess let's go to that fuel cell, the new wrinkle. There we go. Thank you, Kelly. So the big conversation these days, sort of the sexy new topic, is fuel cells and hydrogen. It's an opportunity that opens especially for class 8 in light of the limitations of battery vehicles for traditional over-the-road operations. So if you talk about what are the selling points, clean operation, the potential for carbon-free emissions, something that natural gas, for example, doesn't quite deliver in terms of carbon-free. It overcomes the battery constraints of cost, weight, and charging, potentially. And again, that big P, potential word, will keep coming up in the fuel cell hydrogen conversation. Refueling times can be diesel comparable, so you don't lose in your duty cycle 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours on a per day basis for recharge times, even with fast charge. And finally, no weight penalty when batteries are scaled up. And again, this is sort of the critical Achilles heel when it comes to class 8 long haul operations. The constraints for right now, the cost of fuel cells look to be, if not prohibitive, at least significant, though fuel cell advocates say with scale, that hurdle can be overcome. It's not only what's under the hood, but also surrounding infrastructure. Hydrogen manufacturing costs and the development of a hydrogen distribution network remain big question marks that need to be addressed and need to be solved over the next 10 to 20 years. And finally, if we don't see adoption in other significant marketplaces, like the light vehicle market, then the commercial vehicle volumes have to be enough to justify investment in manufacturing and distribution. So on motor vehicles where scale is a critical consideration, the question is, will fuel cells and hydrogen see enough adjacent applications to justify the scale benefits and the learning curve benefits that need to come in the manufacturing and distribution process? Advancing from here, some of our top takeaways. Next slide, Kelly, please. Okay, what we anticipate that we're going to find in our new work, battery costs. This is very critical. Our estimate in terms of the leading edge right now is the battery costs around $225 a kilowatt hours. Then there's the question mark, will there be a Moore's Law kind of principle operating here? Our best guess is that yes, there will be, but not in a Moore's Law 12 months to 18 months kind of time frame. We think battery cost and battery performance improvements will in essence double. Costs come down by half every 5 years. So we're looking for those costs to come down by half by 2025 and perhaps by another 50 to 100% by the time we reach end of decade. Government assistance is going to be critical. It's critical in natural gas. It's going to be critical in electrification to, in essence, level or maybe even tilt the playing field in order to bring about scale and in order to generate those volumes. And again, the speed of take rates, we always come back to these 4 critical issues when it comes to speed of adoption and which of the low-hanging fruit will be plucked first by electrification. Number one is vehicle range. Shorter ranges are more conducive, particularly to battery operations. Frequency of stops for regenerative braking. Once again, that can extend the range of the vehicle, and it also makes for more promising TCO considerations. Route regularity, once again, when you have a randomized route, when you have long distance route, that works to the disadvantage of battery vehicles. And then, of course, weight sensitivity, because batteries are pretty heavy in terms of their contribution to the overall weight of the drivetrain. Next slide, Kelly, please. Okay, applications with strong TCO economics. Class 8 transit buses, yard spotters, Class 6 and 7 urban and local delivery trucks, school buses, beverage trucks, parcel delivery. And you can see that the unifying element in these is close to base operations, partial day operations in terms of the duty cycle, returning home to base, a non-randomized routing, non-randomized duty, and the ability to devote a significant part of your typical 24-hour day to recharging. So all those tilt the playing field to the advantage of battery vehicles. The applications where battery vehicles lose out to diesel, regional and private truckload, long-haul truckload. Again, just because of the very nature of the weight, the range, and the nature of the mission. Next slide, Kelly. Okay, alternative scenarios. What tilts the playing field? What circumstances would lead to high adoption? In our work, we say if there's a possibility of diesel rising to $6 to $7 a gallon and battery costs moving to $85, in essence, changing the calculation on the TCO considerations, all of a sudden, the numbers that I showed earlier in terms of the potential of BEV rises by 20 to 25 percentage points. So instead of talking about 20% order of magnitude shares in medium duty, you could be talking about upwards of half the market in a 15-year time frame if you see this kind of dramatic escalation in diesel prices and if battery costs start hitting the low end of the estimated trajectory. Flip side, of course, if you have low adoption, if diesel drops to $2 a gallon, and who's to say that could be impossible, especially after the last year? And we think that would cap battery electric vehicles share at low single digits, even in the out years, 10 to 15 years down the road, unless the government were to step in and intervene in a significant way. Next slide, Kelly. So, with that, let me recap some of the issues and some of the developments that have occurred in the last 24 months. First of all, we see that the OEs, both the traditional players, the legacy players, and the new entrants have progressed significantly in product development. We're moving away from skunk works and prototype vehicles to actual production in 2021 and 2022. So the dream is becoming a reality. Certainly battery makers, we're not going to mention any names, but you can read the press and you know who these players are working down the cost curve, time and scale. You know, whether it's a 5-year Moore's law in battery packs or slightly longer, slightly shorter, we're starting to see the scale across the board, not only in North America, but worldwide, that will bring costs down. Regulatory requirements are becoming clearer and in a certain sense becoming more demanding and more drastic. So compliance is going to be a reality, but we also know that there's some significant price tags associated with that. And again, fuel cells, they're getting attention, but some of the questions do linger. And questions that are on the table with regard to, will we see fuel cell vehicles in large numbers in a 10-year time frame, a 15-year time frame, or will it be the classic 20 years and out kind of time frame? Technology advancing, that other complement, which is hydrogen has to be out there. Hydrogen has to be available to fleet operators, to truck operators. Will it be there? It's all with motor vehicles. It's always a scale issue. Scale is important, and it's a clean answer, and that's the good news. The considerable promise and potential of a clean answer, but again, the costs have to make sense. So, with that, let me pass the baton, segue over to my colleague Frank Malley. Frank, take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. Happy to be able to talk to you today. As Steve mentioned, he is the only member of the group here who's in Columbus. I'm talking to you from northern Michigan today, about just outside Traverse City, about 2 hours north of Grand Rapids. So we're going to talk about regulations and in direction, particularly with respect to the impact California has. And certainly there's always challenges, but there's opportunities as well. So on the next slide, we kind of take a look at regulations in the broader scheme. We're not talking, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here with regards to the regulatory impact on the commercial vehicle industry. It's not only environmental, it's across the board. Lots of things that we take as a day-to-day business impact, operationally, lots of safety regulations, the regulations on drivers with regards to hours of service, drug and alcohol testing and training. Some of the regulations take away the driver's supply. Some of the regulations are going to help generate more drivers with a training size and training programs. And then, of course, size and weight is always an issue in the industry. If we have changes in trailer sizes, potentially we need fewer trailers as we move forward. So, on the next slide, I'll give an indication of the way that we actually show some of these issues to our clients. As Steve mentioned earlier, we publish a number of reports for our clients on a monthly basis. This is a document section that I do in our North American Outlook, our forecast, and this is actually a very live document. It is just not 5 or 6 pages of tables. Most all of these lines will link to their sources, whether it's a federal government ruling, something on emissions, something on safety, country type things. So this is how we try to keep our clients up to speed on some of the things that are forefront as far as regulations are concerned. And the yellow coding is the key to them to say, hey, something changed in the last month or two. This is something you really need to take a look at. So on the next slide, we kind of show that regulations are really, a tug of war. We've got, and I don't mean to put all the government and the advocates on one side and the CV dealers and manufacturers on the other side, because the players can switch sides here. What we're trying to do is end up with a cleaner environment, but there's still a job to do. We have to have vehicles out there that are going to operate with a solid business case and allow fleets to make sure that they that they can get the job done in a profitable standpoint. On the next slide, we kind of take a look at the long-term regulatory history from a environmental standpoint. We're well over 20 years of impact from EPA, various versions of EPA rulings, greenhouse gas 1 and 2s. More recently, the big concerns are what's happening in California with their zero emission vehicle standards and their lower NOx targets. We've got GHG2 for trailers. Trailers are a pretty important part of the Indiana environment. Lots of trailer manufacturers in Indiana, and EPA is probably trailing California a bit here as we look at this with their advanced notice of proposed rulemaking. That's what that little acronym stands for. With Clean Truck Initiative, it's something that California Air Resource Board has been trying to get pull EPA forward, and perhaps with a new administration, things will change a little bit as we move forward over the next few years. As we look at the next slide, one of the biggest things that's happened over this past year is that CARB really did change the zero emission the ZVE ante back in June. Kelly, if you could get to the next slide, please. They had an existing pattern of sales percentages proposed under their clean truck standards, but they kind of changed the rules. They reset the clock with regards to where they wanted these units to go, and the key here is when it's a state issue, it's sold in versus used in. They are helping get these products developed and business cases proven, so potentially they move across the United States in future years. But for California, it's a sold in versus used in, and you see that these are sales percentages within the state of California. It will be interesting to see how they implement this, because the challenge is, fine, it wasn't sold in California, my fleet's in California, but I'm going to go buy a unit in, well, fill in the blank, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Reno, someplace, and then bring it into the state. That's kind of the challenge that happens with some of these. In talking to CARB, they say that this and the omnibus rules that have been put into that have been talked about will be a 2 to 3 year process to get things absolutely finalized. And they fully admit that what they are doing is creating a demand for electric vehicles. I was kind of surprised they used that phrase in the response to communication I had with them. And one of their major concerns as they're regulating this change to zero emission vehicles is both in light vehicle and heavy duty segments is electric production. How are we going to support these trucks, make sure that they're fueled correctly? The next slide shows an awful lot of detailed text, but talks about the omnibus regulation that CARB put into place, and it's almost kind of a pincer move. They're talking about reducing or increasing the requirement for zero emission vehicles, and then really tightening down on the rest of the market, the portion for either internal combustion engines, whether they be spark or compression oriented. So they're making it very difficult to have the ICE type engine as we go forward, hopefully shifting the demand over to electric. And that's kind of, as I would term it, their pincer move. How do they encourage some of these changes? On the next slide, we look at some of the pilot programs that they've got in place. It's a challenge for them. It is not a bottomless pit as far as funding is concerned. Jim mentioned that government assistance is critical, and here are some of the things that are now being worked on in California to help meet these regulations that they're setting. And you can see that as you read through here, we've got lots of medium duty type projects, delivery type projects. There's an electrification project in the middle. What's interesting is for as much as they're doing, it's very ZEV centric, but they've got many more takers than they have the available funds. So they freely admit that their wait list coming out of their calendar, their fiscal year 2019, was double, exceeded their entire available budget that they were able to fund. So their initial list that they pared down to the players that ended up getting funding was very extensive. So this plus any of the grants or other funding that's available, I guess my key point here is whether it's California or whether it's Indiana, get on the list early. The availability of funds is very tight, and if you wait, you could be out of luck with regards to the available funding. on the next slide, I kind of show the same image that Jim did with a little more emphasis on the regulatory piece. California freely admits that they are creating vehicle demand. So, our regulations, market driven, are driving the market in the state of California. They're obviously definitely trying to drive the market. And if you talk to the fleets who are operating electric vehicles in California as they're trying to meet these goals, it is at this point not a situation where they have a business case without the incentives and subsidies and grants. So, why is all this happening in California? For the funding that they've got, they are the primary source of driving the market. If you think about the population density in California, you're looking at Los Angeles County, that I believe has over 10 million people. That's more people in the entire state of Indiana. That's more people in the entire state of Ohio. That's actually more people than in more than 41 states in the United States. So, that doesn't even talk about the entire population, since California is the most populated state in the country. So, they have a population density that makes it very, encourages them to try to get these cleaner vehicles into place. But even with all the money they're trying to support this with, again, the funding is definitely not certain. On the next slide, I borrow an image from a Freightliner presentation that occurred earlier this week. And what are the regulations helping to drive? At this point, there's still a job to do. The logical case examples were beautifully identified here with regards to last mile food and beverage, drayage, regional, P&D type activity. Return to home is the major opportunity at this point that can be effectively implemented. And it obviously, that type of thing solves the major uses with vehicles and infrastructure. Utilities, remember, there's regulation out there for utilities to support this process as well. In California, the term they use is pull to pad. The fleet may have to acquire the chargers. There are likely going to be funds available to help them with that, but the utility is going to be there to support the actual linking to that charging system. So and the utilities are, in California at least, are certainly stepping forth to take that to drive that expertise. The utilities are quite excited to gain that experience, and it drives an efficiency in the additional build in that for that infrastructure. So if we take a look at the next slide, I'm going to go through some information that doesn't drive information with here's how many dollars are available for a particular type of vehicle, but it's actually out of a recently published CARB document that talks about what their strategy is in commercial vehicles, what beachheads, and they actually do use that term, that they are trying to drive these regulations to develop. And they target three areas: zero emission, combustion, and market and efficiencies. And efficiencies are not just fuel efficiencies. Efficiencies are complete system efficiencies. And they do note that the tracks are not mutually exclusive, that all these three categories overlap on themselves. But you can see where, with these images on the zero emission beachhead, where they're trying to go and how they think they're going to step across the market with both on-road and off-road segments that. And these are things you heard from Steve, and I think you heard them from Jim as well, regarding the transit and delivery. And you don't get to the heavier duty longer term product until way far out in the development phase. On the combustion side, again, some of the same types of so some of the same types of efforts, but the one thing that they say is that while they have a three-prong effort and a three-prong attention on how they're developing these regulations, this combustion piece next year, when they redo this strategic plan document for CARB, the construction piece may go away. They may completely just bypass talking about combustion engines as they're making the big press to electric vehicles. On the next page, they start to address efficiencies, and I pulled some of their information that shows things in a little different factor. It's the types of things that are become much more operational from a regulatory standpoint. Autonomous vehicle operation out there in the upper right-hand corner, including platooning just below that. It's a very interesting perspective as to how they think, okay, we've now developed the vehicles. Let's make sure that they operate we have the operational attention to get these things operating in a much more efficient pattern. So it's more efficient vehicles, even operating more efficiently. When they start looking at the various electric options from a regulatory standpoint, in the next slide with battery electric vehicles, they take a look at the markets, and you can see what key markets they're looking at down the left-hand side. Heavy duty and medium duty delivery, drayage, which given their port activity is pretty significant. Shuttle buses, school buses, transit buses. That's the whole transit piece we've talked about. And then refuse. They look at this as saying, we have, where is the technology? And you see that they go from demonstration to pilot to commercial. And some of these things are now, these areas are, they're proving their worth from after the regulations have driven these segments into the electric vehicle space. The incremental vehicle costs still have some challenges seeking a total cost of operation successful business model. And a lot of the fleets out there will say that without the support, without the grants, they could not they could not make this happen. So but you also notice that these are all categories that are much less range issue oriented. And TRL, by the way, the term is technologically readiness level. So California freely admits that there's process here. So when we go to the fuel cell, which is, as Jim said, from a regulatory standpoint or from a market development standpoint, this is going to be the appears to be the up and comer. They start to look at both the delivery segments again. They don't really get to a point where they're talking about heavy duty, long range, over the road types of things here, but they realize that there's going to have to be support for cost of hydrogen at the pump. And again, return to home can make this much more palatable in the initial phases. The concern over incremental vehicle costs and is certainly a big thing that they're looking at. And the big unknown right now is with the experience they have experience on the light vehicle side with fuel cells. Roughly, there's less than 50 hydrogen stations available in the state of California at this point, but they're all light vehicle oriented. If there was a heavy duty vehicle that was fuel cell driven, likely they wouldn't even be able to approach the pumps that are being used currently. So there's a whole infrastructure that needs to be built because those the capability just isn't there. So I'm trying to give you a viewpoint of California's thought process here as to how they are driving these regulations, which will eventually come across into the states that they have partnerships with, roughly 13 across the United States. The one thing that on the next slide I will close with is the impact of change in administrations. We tread lightly here because there's certainly no certainties, but we would certainly expect that a Biden administration would have much more of a green stance and continue to encourage electrification in both the personal and commercial vehicle space. They'll do that with regulatory changes as well as executive orders, most likely. We would anticipate that EPA and CARB could well have a much better relationship, particularly if the rumors of the head of the EPA becomes the person who is currently running CARB. That being said, we still have an issue with Senate balance, and who will the appointees be who are trying to get these things in place? And the key to consider is that no matter what happens, regulatory-driven change is always going to be a slow process. So it's nothing that's going to happen overnight, as Steve mentioned earlier with the fracking statements and such. That's not an instant change. That's something that could be could take many years to occur. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton back to Kelly.
Go. Thank you all very much. That was very informative and refreshed my memory on a lot of things. I do want to encourage you, if anyone has a question, you have a chat box there that you can type a question in directly to me or to the group. I will read it aloud for the gentleman to answer while we're waiting on any of those that might come through. VW monies, grant monies, as you're most possibly aware, the Volkswagen settlement passed out a large pot of billions in all the states based upon the number of those offending vehicles in the lawsuits that were registered in their state. The dollars were allocated according to those percentages. Indiana received in that pot around 40 million, round numbers. They then, those dollars are being administered by our Indiana Department of Environmental Management. They have in the last couple of years or so, put dollars out on the street for various opportunities for funding. I have been reading through those. My background is some grant writing experience. I've been reading through those and watching those to see if there's opportunity for our members and our carriers. We had one member receive funding for an electric truck that's here just locally. However, infrastructure isn't being included in the electric commercial vehicle grant funds. So that infrastructure is on your own dime, if you will, unless you're able to find other grants and things out there. So just so you know, if you have a question about any of those funds, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help, happy to give you sort of the crib notes version of what's going on in those documents. I think just this week, the IDEM had a review of grant proposals for electric infrastructure, but it's focused more on passenger cars and trying to create a corridor or strategically place fueling infrastructure around the state on the various interstate corridors and roadways and things. So again, reach out to me if you have any questions on that. I'm happy to help you find the answers or understand the process and what's going on. Gentlemen, I guess there's a question I have. I don't have any submitted right now, but before we wrap up, have you looked at yet, or is it too soon to tell really on insurance for these vehicles? I know in the light duty passenger car market, insurance, because it was a new thing, they weren't really sure to do it or how much it was going to be. I know on the one truck our member bought or is getting, that was a pretty high ticket price. And it's a new, again, technology and whatnot. So have you looked at that at all in any of the two applications you discussed?
Jim, I'll go ahead and take the lead on this, and you can tell us if it's any different on the battery side. But Kelly, what I would say is that generally what the insurance companies are trying to do is protect, the value of the asset. So the premiums that you see for alternative vehicles do tend to be higher, at least in total dollar amounts, but as a percentage of the vehicle price, not so much. There aren't really any inherent reasons, I guess. I'll say danger, if you want to say that, for example, for a natural gas vehicle to be more or less safe, I guess, than a diesel truck. People think about, oh, natural gas, it could explode. And the reality is, if you look at the science, diesel is actually more likely to cause more damage from fire or explosion than natural gas is. So nothing along those lines that makes the insurance companies nervous, I guess. So it's really just the higher dollar amount of the vehicle itself that causes it on the natural gas side. Is that the same on electric, Jim, or is it different?
Well, I think part of the challenge for the insurance companies, particularly on the electric side, more so than for natural gas, is the numbers that are out there are small. So what that means, what that spells into is lack of experience. And we see it manifest in a few different forms. And Kelly, in a way, I haven't talked to that many insurance factors, but I think I can make generalizations to the effect that an actuary, an insurance professional, likes to work with large data sets. Just like all of us data people, we like to work with large data sets. Part of the challenge in a number of different dimensions, insurance being one of them, resale, financing, leasing, is that you don't have a large population of vehicles on the road to derive a secondary market, used truck values, the cost of replacement parts that are damaged. So I think when it comes to insuring an electric vehicle, the insurers are going to protect themselves by charging what amounts to a high risk premium for the fact that we don't have a lot of robust information now that will probably morph, and it'll morph to the better as we get more vehicles on the road and applications, and in essence, sorry to say, more damage claims, such that we can see what is the cost of repair. How do you find a technician to repair an electric vehicle versus your standard diesel or gas drivetrain? So all this constitutes this learning curve, and I think part of the problem is the early adopters will pay a little bit extra of a price for the fact that they're living on the frontier, on the leading edge.
You know, there's one thing that the early adopters may be able to help on here, that so many of the grants and vouchers require reporting of usage. You know, not only how much, but where was this vehicle driven? You know, the thing in California is California's paying the dollars. They want most of the miles being run to be within the state. So there is a tracking of the usage that's part of these new vehicles on the road that may well be able to be brought in and help that experience level for the insurance companies.
Yeah, very true, very true. And that data should all be aggregately available. They may not want to share out individual fleet information and whatnot, but typically I think if it's DOE, especially the Clean Cities program that's gathering that data, they'd be able to share that in aggregate form at the conclusion of the projects and let folks know how they did and what those numbers looked like compared to anticipated or estimated. That's great, gentlemen. Thank you so much. We don't have any other questions submitted, so I will conclude by just saying keep an eye on our events page on our website. We still have a couple of more webinars yet this year, one on the clearinghouse and the full driver queries you have to do through the clearinghouse and FMCSA by January 5th. And then also something on cybersecurity and cybercrime and trucks and on your computer systems and things. So watch for those two. Sign up for those coming up here in a couple of weeks. Gentlemen, thank you. Your ACT team and his amazing team. I'm glad we're working together and appreciate all the information that you all have shared. And I just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and be it whatever you do, wherever you do it, be safe. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
I don't know why now that IMTA logo just popped up. I've been trying to get pop up for the last hour. Oh well. Oh well. That's why it was a sticky note, Steve. When you thought I disappeared,
Yeah.
I finally gave up and just like folded the sticky note and tried to very discreetly like slide that over the camera view because I'm like I don't want to be on camera the entire time. Oh goodness. So thank you guys. I think that was great information. I think the beauty of it is that it was recorded and we're going to be able to share it.
Sure. Yeah. People can watch it when they have time or inclination. Yeah.
Yeah, because there were 4 or 5 that didn't get on for
Okay.
whatever reason, whatever fire popped up that they had to put out. But they'll get that video, and they know that when they register that they're going to get access to the video too. So
Sure.
thank you very much. I have other fuels and technologies that they had told me in a survey earlier in the year that they were interested, our Safety and Maintenance Council especially, interested in hearing about. So I'll get with Ian as I'm trying to fill those gaps and let them know what those are and see if you guys have any interest in coming back and chatting with us.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you both.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Take care.
You too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.